like that happening. We had a discussion between me and a pagan, and I was recording through OBS, and I went to go check the video, and the whole thing was like silent on my end.
Yeah. Well, I
It
mean,
sucked,
at
man.
least they can hear the speaker, so that's the important thing.
Yes.
I had
Oh
the
yeah.
same thing happen, but I had Peter Hitchens on, Christopher Hitchens' brother,
Yeah.
and his audio was completely gone. They couldn't hear it. But luckily, I had
That's
to. We noticed during the stream, so what I did was I just took my microphone and just put it up against the speaker, and so they were like hearing him through my microphone.
oh wow.
Jerry
Oh,
Riggett.
crazy, man. Yeah, you got to do it, man. It's crazy. We just we re-recorded. She was nice enough to come back on and discuss the same topic, so it was pretty cool.
Who was
Even though
the?
she already heard my opening, she already heard my opening. So like she went back and she had some stuff that I had like given her and put it in her opening. So I was like, all right, that's fine. It's all about learning anyway.
Who was the pagan who you had on?
Her name was Nash, no last name. That was her handle. So I didn't ask her for her real name or anything. I'd be a little rude, but
Yeah. So I've actually been interested in talking to pagans too, because one of the things that I would like to talk about is like the cosmological argument, because from my perspective, that works for just literally anything or any religion that says there is just something fundamental to reality. So I'd like to ask some pagans what they, in their religion, is fundamental to reality, because I know like Thor, as far back as I can go, I think is you got the world tree, Yggdrasil, and then there's like the chaos beyond that. And I think that's something near what their necessary thing is. And so there was a recent video, I think, with Mike Winger or Braxton Hunter or something, and they were saying that, oh, the cosmological argument doesn't work for Thor. I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, it actually does, because their religion has a necessary thing too. But so, yeah, I'm
but
definitely interested.
I think probably why they go off of that is because for pagans it's not about like the logic and stuff. Everyone that I've talked to, it's about emotion. It's purely emotional. It's just purely emotional. Where we go back and we would try to discuss it philosophically and scientifically or whatever. Theirs is just like pure emotion. Like a couple of them that I said, hey, for me, I felt that it was true, or I heard the voice of Thor, and it's like, what does that even mean, But it's cool. I don't know if you would get very far with that, but good luck.
From my perspective, I think they're pretty much the same. Like, I think that obviously the pagan religions haven't had as many theologians like Anselm Aquinas, those kinds of guys to build up apologetics. They haven't really needed it as much. But I think that all of the same apologetics could work for both religions. And if the pagans took it as seriously and wanted to actually get into apologetics, they could probably just use the exact same arguments and jerry rig them to work equally as well for the pagan religions. That's essentially my interpretation of it. But yeah, I think that because they haven't had those same figures who have focused on the logical arguments, and since they haven't had that much power in society to have to focus on that kind of thing, then they obviously haven't developed the same kinds of apologetics, kind of like Muslims didn't for the most part either, and they're kind of adapting all of the Christian apologetics today.
Yeah. Well, the big one with paganism right now is the Norse, right? So um, they will admit that they don't have even much history to build something up like that. So that's one of the things that I've gotten from them. Like their history is contained in literally like the Pros Edda and the Poetic Edda. So they have a hard time even being able to form an apologetic. That's just my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know if the history, like, what is, like, historically, I'm not sure if there makes much of a difference, like, that point. You could base it in a human being, like Ragnar Lothbrok or something, like, say, hey, this guy has some connection to the mythology, but I don't think that the history really adds that much or takes that much away, because especially when you're talking about things that are supernatural.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're looking for definitions of their gods and stuff, it's kind of hard to narrow it down. So, um, yeah. So that's just from my experience, and what their roles are and stuff like that. So, but yeah. So, yeah, paganism is pretty
Yeah.
cool.
So anyway, David, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time
Yeah,
to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your podcast and your channel before you
yeah,
start?
man. I'm a student. I study apologetics and philosophy, and I run two shows. Well, I help run the second one. I'm a co-host on Skeptics and Seekers, where I engage with skeptics all the time, and they beat me up, probably like Tom's going to do today. And I also host my own channel, which is Proselytize or Apostatize. And what we try to do is get people on to have conversations like this one, and even debates. We do formal debates too, kind of like your modern day debate, or like any type of debate you watch on YouTube. We try to do it that way. Our goal though is to get people with different worldviews to talk and to flesh out the big questions, right? So one of my strategies is to let the atheist and the person that doesn't agree with Christianity, or because we're more of a Christian podcast, but is to like, hey man, you got a home here. Anytime you want to come on and debate a topic, you're welcome to bring that to us. I mean, I'll even let you co-host with me, and that's kind of like the atmosphere we try to present, kind of like Unbelievable with Justin Bryland. We try to give that atmosphere, and kind of like modern day debate does too. So
Cool. So I'm an atheist. I debate theists all the time, kind of my thing. Could you? So I believe by atheist, what I mean is I don't believe that the theistic or God hypothesis can explain anything better than naturalism. I think naturalism best explains everything about our world. Could you tell me a little bit of the reasons you believe theism is a better explanation, or what it explains better, or what some of the problems that atheism does not address are? And I'd like to tell you my thoughts on those and hear your thoughts on my position.
right on. Well, first, Tom, I've followed you for a while. I think you present a lot of good challenges that make people think, and that's kind of like what these things are for. We need to think through these things. But I did hear that you're a rock climber. Right? Is that true?
Yes, at the local rock climbing gyms.
Oh, really? Yeah. I started in a gym. I got a funny story before we get into all that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
But we have what we call crags over here, right? Right in the Potomac, we have the Maryland side and the Virginia side, and it's in Great Falls. So we have all these crags and they're rated climbing. And I had learned in Atlanta how to do some stuff with a professional boulder climber, right? And he taught me some pretty cool moves. And when I started climbing at those crags, I went down this one descent, and it was a 510 plus. I don't know if you're familiar with the rating systems, but it
Mm.
was like a 510 plus. It's supposed to be like a really hard one. I think the highest is like 511, but it was a 510 plus, and I scaled it, man. I went straight up it, man. I was like, man, I just scaled a 510 plus. And then like I look at my book and just realized I just did the second descent. So I was like, oh man. So I went down again and I tried it on the hard side. Oh man, it wore me out, man. So yeah, I love rock climbing too, man. I haven't been able to do it in a long time because I have I was a single dad for 7 years, so it was kind of hard to keep everything going. And I even quit college there for a while and
It's
raised
gotta
my
strap your
daughter.
kid on your back and do it with the kid.
Oh man, yeah, yeah. If they had those type of things back then, it would be a lot better. But everything they have now, they didn't have back when I was doing all, when I first started being a parent. So, but yeah, man, I think theism is the best explanation. I'm a cumulative case guy. I think that the reasons for God, I would go through the same classical arguments that you've heard before. I think that they hold a better explanation of it. So that's basically where I would start. If we're in some formal debate, but I think I look at apologetics and I look at belief like as a puzzle. Obviously, I'm not going to start with a a a cosmological argument if you already believe there is a God, right? So I'm gonna start where I think you're at. That's and I think the best way to do that is getting to know somebody versus just going into arguments. Because I've always held to this moniker that people wanna they want to know how much you care before they care how much you know. So that's kind of like where I go with it.
Sure.
So I mean, if you have anything specific on that, yeah,
I have
that's
no
kind of
idea what.
yeah, so I mean, yeah, so like I think there's many pieces of the puzzle when the those puzzles form a picture. I think the best explanation is theism. So that's where I stand on it.
Like, do you think that any one argument is better explained by theism than by naturalism, or do you think that all of the arguments individually can be better explained by naturalism?
I think all the arguments are best explained by theism. I would have to like get specific to kind of uh, to get a rough estimate. Like I've heard your naturalistic pantheism. I haven't had time to really dive into it.
Sure,
due to
sure.
just
So
the
just
time constraints. Yeah.
any one argument, which do you think is better explained by theism? What would just
So I
one of
think
them
the
be?
cosmological argument is better explained by theism, and I think the teleological argument I do like that
All right, let's just start with the
more. Yeah.
cosmological for the first
Go
one.
ahead.
Like, so my interpretation, cosmological argument, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. The universe has a cause. Like, yes, agreed. But when we're talking about what is the best explanation of that cause, we have lots and lots of very good evidence that quantum fields can exist outside of space-time and can cause things to exist. We have no evidence that brains can, so it seems like a much better explanation to go with the physics here and say whatever caused the universe is probably one of those physical quantum field thingies that we have lots of evidence for. And it seems like a very bad explanation to say it's a mind. That would be like saying it's a potato or a pineapple of some kind. Like, we have no evidence that such things can exist outside of space-time. So why would the quantum field explanation be not significantly better than the God hypothesis to explain the cosmological beginnings of our universe?
So how would you go about saying that these quantum fields actually explain the beginning of our universe? So I mean, yeah, how would you know that and so forth? I mean, yeah.
So we look at the equations of general and special relativity in quantum mechanics, and we see if we can solve the equations with removing space and time, because space and time are represented by the lambda symbol in general and special relativity. So if we can solve the problems, solve the equations while removing that symbol, then we can create a thing that can exist outside of space-time. It's essentially interactions that happen without the space and the time variable. That's what it means to solve it without including those principles in them. And so it's if that solution that we have for the equation maps onto reality, then we can have a kind of a thing that exists outside of space-time to cause the universe, and that is the current consensus in physics.
Yeah, do we have a quantum theory of gravity though? I mean, I don't think we actually have a successful theory yet, right?
We have
Because
lots
I
of
know
theories.
there's several models out there. There's several models out there, but these guys always criticize each other, and none of them truly work. I mean, even Carroll said that to Wall when after the Craig debate, right?
Well, they all work better than theism. So all of the current models of physics, quantum gravity, string theory, de Broglie pilot wave theory, they're all combinations of equations that have been of stuff that's been demonstrated to exist. So everything in physics, all of the equations are just combinations of things that have already been demonstrated to exist. Like the multiverse hypothesis is a combination of vacuum states and early universe inflation. Vacuum states have been demonstrated in the Casimir effect. Early universe inflation has been demonstrated by Guth's early universe inflation theory, which was made predictions about the CMB, which were confirmed. So all of the parts of those theories in physics have all been confirmed. They're just different combinations of things that we know that exist, as opposed to a God, which is a combination of a bunch of things that we have no evidence that exist, all powerful, all knowing, conscious, non physical mind stuff. Like, so we don't have any evidence that those things exist, but we have lots and lots of evidence that all the things in physics exist. Therefore, even though we don't have proof of the particular combination of which interpretation, if any, is the correct one in physics, all of the parts have been demonstrated to exist. So it's like if we're saying what caused the footprint in the snow and we say it's a horse, that's a better hypothesis than saying a unicorn, because we have lots of evidence horses actually exist. We have no evidence unicorns exist. So if we're talking about a solution to what caused the universe, if we're building a model with things we already have very good evidence that exists, that model is a better model than one where we're adding stuff that we don't know or don't have any evidence that it exists, like the properties of a god.
All right. So how would you say that we don't know that those properties of God would necessarily be a better explanation, especially with all the arguments that are out there? So we have, and like I said, it's a cumulative case. So there's several inferences that you make that go to the best explanation, right?
Well, yeah, but do you think that the philosophical arguments in any way compare to the veracity of physics? Like, do you think that the philosophical arguments from Aquinas can in any way compare to like modern quantum physics in its reliability or reference to reality? Like, because I don't. I
Yeah,
think
well, I
there's.
don't know. Yeah, like I don't know how reliable and the physics are there. I see a lot of different models. Well, at least in my time that I've read it, I haven't been on the cosmological one for at least a year now. So, or I haven't been looking at any news that follows it in the last year. So, but yeah, man, I think that the philosophical can hold just as much weight as the scientific arguments. So I think that that's one of the ways we come to know things. Is there are philosophical truths I think that we can discover. So that's where I would stand on that. So I think they both can work together.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because from my perspective, the science can make novel testable predictions. It can tell us stuff about reality before we know it. We can use it to build computers. We can use it to do a bunch of stuff. Philosophy, not so much. We can pretty much do nothing with it. It's just kind of armchair thinking about stuff. So to me, science seems to be significantly more reliable. If you're going to place your bets on which is true, go with the science every time. Philosophy is just like, nope, don't even consider it. Go with the science. To
Yeah,
me, it seems
but
like. Go ahead.
but isn't the science though based off of philosophy of science?
Yes, but it has an extra aspect, which means it corresponds to reality. So philosophy is like writing a story. You can write a Harry Potter book or you can write a history book. They're both books, but one book is clearly better than the other book. So if we're going to go based off of the which book more likely corresponds to reality, we're going to say the history book does because the history is a book plus facts based in reality, like science is. We're not going to go off of the Harry Potter book, even though it's also a book. So the fact that science is based in philosophy doesn't mean they're the same thing because science is the philosophy plus that extra thing, which is the correspondence to reality. It's required that the properties in this book, in this science philosophy, must be based in reality and can't just be made up by armchair philosophers because we know that making stuff up doesn't tell us anything about reality. You can make stuff up that doesn't exist, so that happens all the time. And because science requires that extra step of we have to differentiate is this imaginary or real, it's significantly more reliable, which is why we can use it to make testable predictions about the world and we can't for philosophy. So it seems like even though you're right, science is based off of or built on philosophy. It has an extra step there which makes it significantly better, kind of like a history book is significantly better than a Harry Potter book when it comes to describing reality.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I see what you're saying. I don't really have a comeback on that. I would say that that philosophy can give us certain truths that do correspond to reality. I think there's more ways than uh, the scientific method to come and know things.
Oh, sure.
Uh,
I would totally
yeah.
agree with you there. I
Okay.
wouldn't.
Okay. That's kind of like where I was going
Oh, sure. I
with
was
it.
just making a
But
comparison. Like, do you think that, from my perspective, it seems like if we're going to like put our money on a horse, which one of these horses is more likely to win or to correspond to reality? I'm thinking the science one is a much more reliable, better way to go if we're trying to answer this question. Especially since we're asking questions of cosmology, we should probably go with the cosmologists and the science. It seems
yeah.
like that is a much more reliable answer than the philosophy.
Yeah, I would say that depends on what race the horse was running, right? So I would say that depending on what we need and what we need knowledge for, would determine whether we use philosophy or we use a strict scientific method for it.
Well, could you give me
So
an
yeah, that's
example of like which race we would prefer philosophy over science here? Because if I'm talking about which, if suppose the race is I want to know what is true about reality, that's the race. It seems to me science is the better answer in every case here. Science tells is more likely to give me accurate information about reality than philosophy whenever we ask this question. So I don't. So is there a would you disagree with that, or do you think there's a different race where we should be asking philosophical questions? Because I think that's the race
yeah.
that matters.
I well, yeah. I think both. I think any race that gives us a path to discover new things, I think should be just as important. So where you would be strict into, I don't know if it's scientism you're holding to, but if a strict scientism that you're holding to, but if there's another race that gives us that path, and I can't think of an example right now, I didn't prepare for it. Uh, but yeah, I would I would say that we have to explore every avenue of discovery. And I think
Sure,
that's
sure.
beholden to us. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there could be several different things. Like, I don't have a list of my arguments out here right now, but yeah. So, but you said a lot like, what do the physicists say? What do there's a lot of them that are theists. And, I just talked to two astrophysicists that you know and that you've talked to as well that, think the best explanation is theism. So, I'm not going to go with the just the consensus. I'm going to try to think through it myself. So with the inferences that I make, I think that, you know, the cosmological, given, the philosophical arguments, given the scientific arguments, I think they do point to a theism more than a non-theistic reality. But I understand where you're coming from completely. And I'm sorry. I mean, usually if I'm going to talk about this stuff, I like to prepare for like a month in advance to really be able to get into the weeds and stuff. But yeah, I haven't been able to do that. So I'm
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
yeah, sure. So I'm definitely
And
not.
when it comes to facts, Tom, you're like up here and I'm down here. I mean, I'm just a student, bro. So I understand where you're coming from. But yeah, that's kind of like where I would go,
Right, right. So I'm not advocating for scientism here. I'm not saying that we should only trust science. I'm just saying that science is by far the most reliable system we have. There's nothing that even comes close. And
Yeah.
so so
No,
if we're going
go
to
ahead, Tom.
compare, if we're going to like compare which should we trust to tell us about reality, science wins. Science is the more reliable system. So if you're going to say X is some unknown fact about reality, what should we use to try and discover X? You go with science. Science is the correct answer every time. Now, of course, we can use other methods to try and get there also, but they're far less reliable than science is. So I'm totally not saying science is the only way to gain knowledge, but it's the best way by far.
Yeah, I would agree on that aspect. I think, but I think that uh, that theism collaborates science. I think, or science collaborates theism. So that's kind of like where I would go. And like I said, unfortunately, I don't have any like pressing arguments that I could give you for that right now.
Well,
But
what do
yeah,
you mean
that's
when you
kind
say
of
science corroborates theism? Like, the quote from Sean Carroll in his debate with William Lane Craig comes to mind. Like, if I was going to poll my fellow cosmologists if God had anything to do with the origin of the universe, I would win by a landslide. So,
yeah. Yeah, it's so funny because Carol actually was kind of like dishonest in that debate, and you probably don't think so. But
how
when
so?
well, I don't. Did you ever read his correspondence with Aaron Wall?
Maybe. I don't know.
So Aaron Wall goes out on a limb and he wrote a set of several papers that on his correspondence with Carroll. And one of the things that Carroll did was he inserted a QET model, even though he doesn't hold to it. And
Well, he inserted a
they
lot of
had this,
models he didn't hold to. Like, he actually showed a bunch of them.
yes, but in that argument with Craig, he did something underhanded, and he admitted it in the correspondence. So I would just look at that if I were you. Maybe that's something that you can study on your own and then come to a different conclusion than me. But yeah, so they talked about it, and yeah, that's from what I can tell. But as far as your thing with Carol taking a poll, I would say that poll would be very skewed. I think you would have a lot of theist cosmologists and a lot of atheist cosmologists too. And it goes to show because I watched a series where a gentleman, I don't know if you've heard Closer to Truth or not,
Yeah.
that yeah, he debated several cosmologists, or he talked to several cosmologists there. And uh you know Carroll basically admitted that he didn't want theism to be true because he believes that's the end of science. So I don't think that, but I think there could be more to discover with an infinite being, but I won't know that until I get there, I guess, or we get to that point if we ever do, because I hold to the point that I can't know things with absolute certainty. So I would definitely be on that. I do believe that I try to be that probabilist, and just go with the best explanation that seems to fit with me. And where I'm at right now, that's where I'm at. So could things change? in years to come, absolutely. I think if we're not willing to change, if we're not, I mean, there's several things that I've changed in my worldview from when I started, man. I mean, I started it in this weird charismatic movement that was all about word of faith. I don't know if you've ever heard of them guys, speaking in tongues and all that stuff. And, my theology has changed dramatically since then. So, yeah, if you're not willing to grow and learn, and if you're not willing to, accept new evidence, then yeah, I mean, what are you doing at that point?
Sure, but I mean, I'd be interested to know if you could go back through that paper and find where whatever you think Sean said that was dishonest, if that was uh, in any way maybe it was just like a character, like doing something interesting to make the debate more fun, unless it invalidated any of the facts he said. If any of the facts he said were wrong, that I'd be interested to know. But as far as I know,
Yeah.
every one of the facts he presented in the debate are 100% true and
Well,
corresponding
let's.
to.
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Well, I
I'll
need
email it
I
to
need
you.
more than the link because I've definitely read the conversations and correspondences from him. I've never seen anyone say any of the facts in his presentation were wrong ever,
Okay.
including the
So
the.
if I could give you the paper, like I said, I'll email it, and then you'll be able to
Well,
see,
I'm
and
pretty
then
sure
you'll
the
be able to compare it.
paper doesn't say he said anything wrong either. So if you could find in the paper where it said he did something wrong,
Okay.
like he made a factual error of some kind, like because I know many debaters, including William Lane Craig and myself, do things to add entertainment value
Okay.
to debates. But if he made a factual error, that I'd be definitely interested in. And I'm
Okay.
pretty sure the paper isn't going to say he did because I've checked most of the facts on that debate and they're all correct. Like I can verify the consensus in physics statement, the debates. Nima Arkani Hamad says the same thing. I, like most physicists, am an atheist. So the physicists' polls show that vast majority are atheists and vast majority conclude the theory of God isn't really a thing in cosmological papers or surveys or conferences. Like it's just essentially a 0% something. It's not something people talk about in cosmology. So yeah,
Oh,
if
okay.
you
Well,
know,
yeah. I would love you to send me that consensus
sure,
because from what the astrophysicists that I know that have talked to me about it, they actually say the opposite of what you just said. So it would be interesting just to see what the data shows,
sure,
and I would be willing to listen to that and to read it, man. I love
cool.
to read and learn. So yeah, man.
Definitely, yeah. And if you find in that paper where it says Sean Carroll made a mistake, please
Yeah,
let
I'll,
me
I'll
know.
highlight it. Yeah, I'll highlight it or do whatever I can to,
Cool,
you know, bring it to you. You know.
cool. So and then you mentioned the fine tuning argument.
That's probably one I'm weaker on. So I would say that that's one that I haven't devoted a lot of time to. Um, so I'm still open on that. So I haven't like fully studied into that in the depth that I should.
Sure, sure. Tell me.
Um,
So just what your
so
current understanding of it is, and how would that would indicate a god.
I think that design requires a designer. So I think that, you know, like the initial conditions of the universe are finely tuned and there's information in the universe. And I believe from my experience, from what I've gathered, that information always requires a mind. So that's kind of like where I'd go on that. Does
Uh,
that make sense?
Yeah, so it sounds like the information argument more than the fine tuning argument, because the fine tuning argument I understand to be the constants of the universe could be in like a bunch of different ways, and there's only a very small number of ways that could produce life. And so the fact that our universe is life producing seems to indicate, like, if we see a dice with a million sides and one red side and it lands on the red side, it's reasonable to infer like a mind deliberately placed it on the red side, kind of an argument.
Mm, like I said, I'm not as strong in this one, so I could say that yeah, that's partially it. I think that the fine tuning argument is pretty good. But yeah, I can see what you're saying there. So I don't know where you want to go with that. So you want to
Yeah,
question
so
on that?
typically, like, the response is Dawkins, where he says, "Who fine-tuned God?" So, like, just like there's infinitely many ways the universe could be, and most of them aren't life permitting. There's infinitely many ways a God could be, and he may not create a life permitting universe. So, example, there could be a God who only wanted black holes, or a God who only wanted hydrogen atoms, or a God who only wanted unicorns. And so, just like there's many different ways the universe could be and only like a very very few with life, there's infinitely many ways a god could be and only very few would produce life. So who fine-tuned God to create the universe this way?
Okay, so I would go with I think God is a necessary being. So I would say that, there has to be a starting point. I think God is the eternal factor there. He's the cause there. He's the what they say, causal component or whatever it is.
First mover,
So I
prime
would go
mover.
that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So why does, if God, who has the same level of complexity and needs the same level of design, can just be a necessary being who doesn't need to be designed, why can't we just say the universe is a necessary thing and it doesn't need to be designed either for the exact same reason? Because there's some necessary component behind the universe which causes the properties to be the way they are, just like there's some necessary component of God that causes his properties to be the way he is.
Yeah, I think that the universe is contingent, so our starting points would be different there. So, like from what I can tell from your naturalistic pantheism, the argument you give there, that you believe, it's what goes back beyond this universe is just more nature. So that's I understand that. Mine would be that no, nature is doesn't go back that far. It is God. He is the eternal property
Right.
that
So
began the universe.
the question is like either one could have, the God create could have created the universe, or like a natural quantum field, which is naturalistic pantheism, could have created the universe, and the natural quantum field could just be the necessary thing, and the necessary thing isn't finely tuned because it's necessary, just like God is, and it could create the universe as we see it to produce life, and it's determined to do so because of its properties, just like God is, because He's moral and wants moral beings. So it seems like the naturalistic explanation here is better, a better explanation of the fine tuning, because just like God doesn't need to be fine tuned, well, then the quantum field doesn't need to be fine tuned because it's a necessary thing, just like God is. So why would a God be a better explanation of the fine tuning here, since it's only fine tuned if it's a non necessary thing?
Now, let me ask you this: don't they say that the quantum realm is dependent upon this realm?
No.
Okay. I I saw somewhere that I wish I had my notes. I have stuff on it, but uh, yeah, yeah. I think that it's dependent upon this reality. I thought so. I
Not
could be wrong
sure.
there.
Not
Yeah,
sure what you mean.
I'd have to look. I'd have to look into it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. What was the last thing you said? That the
So
naturalistic.
naturalistic pantheism, the quantum field is a necessary thing, and so it can create the universe just like God does, but it's not, you don't need a conscious being, and it could be, and it doesn't need to be fine tuned because it's a necessary thing just like God is. Therefore, the naturalistic explanation is just as good, if not better, than the theistic explanation to explain the fine tuning of the universe.
So, like, if it's like, if yeah, I would have to see where that the quantum realm would have to be some sort of necessary agent, and it's not contingent upon this reality or uh, the reality, anything beyond that.
So it's, well, I don't know what you mean by contingent on this reality. So God
Yeah,
exists in reality, right? He's not imaginary, because if you don't exist in reality, you
right.
don't exist. So
Yeah, yeah,
obviously the
yeah.
quantum field and God would both exist in reality, and they would be the necessary thing, and then they would create the contingent universe that we're in.
But it isn't. Couldn't the quantum realm be contingent upon something else?
Sure, but so could God. God could have been created by another greater God, but we're just going to say, just like you do, that nope, the quantum realm is the necessary thing, just like you say God is the necessary thing. And if you're talking about a created God, you're just not talking about the same thing we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, obviously our definitions would be different on what God is, So I would describe God probably as a maximally great being that is eternal. So I would go off that. That would be like my hypothesis based on everything else I experience in this reality.
Right,
So
right.
I
So I would
would,
just say that the quantum field is a necessary thing, and that's my hypothesis. So it's not created.
well, yeah, and we both can't prove a hypothesis. We don't have to prove a hypothesis before we start making our observations. So if you want to go with that, that's fine.
Sure. So,
So
but would you say that God is a better explanation of the fine tuning than the necessary quantum field?
from from the inferences that I have so far, from what I've studied in the past, then yes, I would say that for on my understanding, my hypothesis is better fits the data.
How so?
That's a good question. I don't have my notes. I didn't prepare, Tom. I'm sorry. I don't have a lot of preparation for this, man. So yeah, I just basically would come to that to say, uh, from what I've gathered in the field of cosmology and what I've seen and who I've talked to, that better, God is better, better explains that data. So I mean, that's basically all I can give you right now, bud. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna need some examples. I can't really like
Oh,
just
I know,
so
and we
like
can't go anywhere on that. So
yeah,
that's why I said, man, we have to be really general because I'm so entrenched in like communications and tech right now that it's hard for me to even like get concepts outside of that right now because
sure.
that's kind of like where my devotion is right now.
So
So
yeah,
you
I
kind of
would
picked a bad time to interview me.
so I would
That's
say
why I've
that
just been moderating lately.
yeah. So I would say that any examples you could give, I could show that they can be explained or better explained by the quantum field, and that's I'm happy to show you that's the consensus in physics by a large margin. Like no one talks about God in the physics community. There are definitely some very small percentage of theists. It's not a big percentage at all who are in cosmology. I definitely know many who are like Luke Barnes, Jeff Zwirink, Hugh Ross, definitely, but they're this extremely small minority. But and if you ever come up with any, we can talk about those again when you come up with examples. I can show you how those can be better explained by the quantum field. But or, are there any other arguments you think that could are better explained by theism than the naturalistic pantheistic quantum field?
Well, you already know I don't have a detail. I don't have detailed arguments out in front of me right now, but I do think that the moral argument and the historical argument for Christ is pretty solid. Yeah, and then you have your own religious experience. I think there is some weight in that, even though I wouldn't use it in an argument to try to prove God to you. But
But
that's
that's
kind of
the
like where
history
I
one. I
would.
really like the history one. Tell me what. So I agree Jesus existed. I don't think he. I'm not a mythicist, but why would that be indicative of a god? What about the test? What about the evidence? The historical evidence would indicate the resurrection or miracles happened.
What do you mean by what do you mean by like are you talking about like I think the scriptures are reliable. I think we can go back and show that the gospels are reliable historical documents, that they're Greco-Roman biographies, and that the things that happen in them we can have confidence that they happen. So I would go with that, and then the resurrection. I'd give you the basic minimal facts approach you probably heard before. So yeah, that's where I am on it.
Sure. So I mean, I definitely think that much of what happened in the New Testament was true, but that's like there are many historical documents from that time period that include things that are miraculous, and we accept all of the historical facts and reject the miracles. So, like Roman historians wrote about the founding of Rome being from Romulus and Remus being raised by a wolf, but we think that's false. Even though these were historians, pretty much everything they wrote was accurate. We think that's false because in history, testimony doesn't count for things that don't have an empirical basis. So any kinds of claims of miracles, magic, mythical creatures, the paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, those aren't taken seriously in historical documents because in order for testimony to count as evidence, it needs to have an empirical basis. Like if I told you I saw a dog, that would be reasonable to believe. If I told you I saw a unicorn, you should not believe me. And the reason for this is because dogs have an implicit empirical basis. Like there's lots of things about dogs that have been proven independent of our testimony. They're like DNA, bone structure, chemical composition, what they're allergic to, how to train them, et cetera, et cetera. None of that exists for unicorns. So if you have an empirical basis, an implicit empirical basis, then testimony is reasonable to believe. So if history says Lincoln was shot in a theater with a gun, perfectly reasonable. Hannibal crossed the Rubicon, perfectly reasonable. Romulus and Remus were raised by a wolf? No. Thor came down and crushed some giants? Not so much. And so in history and in criminology, it's the same standard used in courtrooms. Testimony doesn't count as evidence for things that haven't been demonstrated to exist empirically, essentially. And so the same thing applies to history, which is why most historians don't take the miracle claims of the Bible seriously. But we do grant Jesus existed. We grant the apostles existed. We grant Jesus was crucified by the Romans. All those things, because those all have an empirical basis. We know those for sure are real, like the dog. But the miracles, not so much. Those we don't take seriously, just like we don't take them seriously for any of the other claimed miracle workers at the time, before or after.
Yeah, well, you see, like again, this is also a problem with the starting point, right? So you would have like, because I believe in God, I believe that miracles are possible, and I think that all the evidence that we have that Jesus existed, he was crucified, and stuff like that, it makes it more believable that these things actually happen with it, especially with the way they're set up. They're not meant to be read as legend, where you would have the Remus and the Wolves. That it's obviously inserted myth, right?
Well, no, that was in a history book, so by
Yeah.
Roman historians who wrote it as literal facts. That was meant as a literal
They
thing.
they they meant that as literal
Yep.
facts. Are you sure about that?
Yep.
Okay, if you could send me some stuff on that, that'd be great.
Sure.
Yeah, if you could. I mean, you don't have to.
Yeah, I've actually talked about this with several
There is one
theists.
thing. There is one thing I want to jump out of the conversation on. Are you sitting on a seashell, dude? Because I
Nope,
swear
this is a
that
chair.
couch, that recliner looks like a daggone
This is a
seashell. Every
lazy
time I see
boy.
you debate, yeah, every time I see you debate, Tom, it's like, is he? It's like it looks. His chair looks like a seashell. But anyways, go ahead. You were saying you talked to a lot of theists.
Yeah, on my channel, I've talked to theist historians, and we talked about this before, that there are many historians who did insert mythical events as actual historical events. So it wasn't written as a fiction. They wrote these because they believed they were true about the history of Rome. This is really common. Most historians in the past included things that we now consider to be mythical because of our current understanding of science. So it's not surprising that people included these in documents that were considered to be historical. It happened all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I would have to look into the specific ones, but from what I can gather so far is that these guys really did believe that Jesus rose again and were willing
Sure.
to die for it. So if these guys historically were willing to die for that, I think there lends some credibility to their testimony. So
Wow.
I mean, you're not going to die for what you know to be a lie. I don't think
Well, sure. The
so.
fact that they believed it, though, it doesn't add evidence that it's true.
It makes a good case for it to be true, I think.
So bereavement
That
delusion.
along, so yeah, I mean, if you're going to go with the delusions or illusions route, I don't think that best fits the evidence. I don't think people have the same kind of illusions all the time, and they end at a certain point. They don't continue, right?
So bereavement delusions are experienced by 60% of people, where a loved one dies and they see and hear them and have physical interactions with them after their death. And they are persistent, and we know they happen to the same level and greater levels than what was attested to by the apostles. And they happen in groups, and that doesn't seem like, and we can prove these exist. They happen at a huge rate, happens to most humans, and there's nothing special about the accounts in the Gospels. Nothing outside of the realm of bereavement delusion.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, finish. Finish.
So it seems very strange to say that we know there's this psychological effect that we've proven is real, and it can explain literally all of the data or most of it, because there's certain things that, like the scene of the 500, wouldn't be a bereavement delusion. That would be more like the Fatima thing where they saw the sun move. But all of the everything in the testimony of the apostles is 100% explained by known psychological facts that have nothing special about them whatsoever. So that doesn't seem to be. We have an empirical basis for all of these psychological explanations. We know they happen. We know they happen at greater amounts, to greater experiences, to cause greater experiences in people than what the apostles claimed to have experienced. There doesn't seem to be anything special about the Gospels here. It just seems to be basic, cut and dry bereavement delusion, psychological effects we know can perfectly well explain right now today.
Well, I don't. I would disagree on that. I think that a delusion or an illusion or whatever you want to call it there, if it, we're talking about groups of people that saw him at the same time, not the Fatima that he told Thomas to touch him. And if we're going to say that the Old Testament or the New Testament is reliable, with all its facts, then I'm going to go with that. Yeah, Thomas did actually touch him. I think that's more believable. So illusions don't have flesh and blood.
Yeah, they do.
Uh,
Bereavement delusions, that literally happens.
they have flesh and blood.
Yep.
You can
Well,
touch
the
them.
people have a illusion that they are actually seeing and interacting with the dead person. They hear their voices, they
Yeah.
see their flesh, they can touch them. They literally have those experiences. Yes.
But the same group of the same people,
Yep.
or is it different for everyone?
It's the same for the loved one. So if a loved one dies, many people in the family will all have bereavement delusions of that loved one.
Together.
Yes, that does happen. Yes.
And that happens. Okay,
Yep.
I didn't. I'd have to see
It's like
that on
there's
that,
a
but
the original name
I've
is
never seen that.
Folie à deux and Folie à trois for three. It's a French name. You can see it's the name for multiple hallucinations happening to the same people at the same time. Folie à deux is the name on the wiki.
On the wiki. Okay, I'll have to look into that. But yeah, so but as far as I could tell, without that, without knowing that, I would still that obviously I go with what I've learned. So um, yeah, and then obviously the other evidence that corresponds with it, such as the reliability of the Gospels and stuff like that. That's where I came to my conclusion on. So
Well, do you
and like
think?
I said, I'm still willing to learn. So we've got to. I have to take stuff like what you just said into consideration. I'd
Sure.
be more than willing to look at it.
Well, do you think the reliability of the the history books of the Roman? I think it was Tacitus or some. I think it was Tacitus who wrote a history book, or Pliny. I think maybe it was Pliny who wrote a history book about the Roman Empire, and it was extremely accurate, more accurate than the New Testament, significantly more accurate. And he included the Romulus and Remus story. Does that mean that we should believe the Romulus and Remus story just because all of its other facts were accurate?
I'd have to look into Pliny again. I think that I haven't like read all of his works, so I'd have to um, look into his specific account there and see what type of history that was that he was writing. If
Okay,
it was
well,
just
let's just
something he learned and so forth, then versus he was actually putting that myth in there. I would have to see. So
well
I don't know.
suppose
I
suppose
really
he
don't like it.
suppose he was
So,
being genuine. He genuinely believed it, and all of his other facts were correct about the historical facts of the Roman Empire. Would that make it reasonable to believe that Romulus and Remus were literally raised by a wolf and founded the history of Rome just because all of his other facts are correct?
I would have to look into exactly what he said there. So if he was if he was treating it as if it was true, I would have to give him the benefit of the doubt, make and look into it and come to a conclusion that way. I wouldn't just dismiss it out of hand, but I would definitely be skeptical and look at it with a skeptical eye. And I would hope anybody would do that. If someone makes a claim about something that's true, look into it and investigate. Right?
Sure. So, like, let's use a more modern example. Let's suppose someone wrote Spider-Man as a historical text, and they put lots of different facts about New York City, and all the different facts about New York City are 100% correct, like describing the buildings, the locations, the events. And they also included there's this superhero named Spider-Man who can shoot webs from his arms and go off of buildings. Would the fact that they got all of the other historical facts correct make it reasonable that we should infer Spider-Man actually existed?
If they were it's just like the same with people that have been abducted by UFOs, right? I mean, I would look into each individual case to see how accurate and how true they were, and what these people believed. I mean, I can't say it's true for certain, but I would assign a level of probability that I would think that maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, and I have to take into consideration all the other evidence. So if someone wrote a history book and they really believed in Spider-Man, which it's kind of hard to think that way because we know that Spider-Man was written as fiction. But if someone was writing it as a true historical document, I think it would behoove us to take their claims into consideration and do an investigation.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Unless we just didn't want to waste time and money on it, and if you're not interested in it, but
I think
yeah.
it's more reasonable to infer that it's made up. Like, I think that because of our prior knowledge of how humans make up stories and add stuff in, and our understanding of psychology, it is more reasonable to just infer that was made up. Now, of course, we can look into it, try to find more evidence, and that's perfectly fine. If we find greater evidence that would overrule this, then yeah, we would go with yes. If we like find Spider-Man's fossils with webs or whatever, for sure.
Right.
But until then, it's more reasonable to accept, no, this was a something they made up. It seems like because of our understanding of human psychology and how people write stories, that we can reasonably infer that no, even though they got all of these other facts right about the destinations in New York, that the added stuff about Spider-Man that was made up. And we can conclude that not just about this book, but about any book. So any book we can say, if the facts they're claiming have an empirical basis, like I saw a dog, or that building, or that structure, that city exists over there, perfectly reasonable to believe. If they add in things that have no empirical basis, which would be miracles, magic, mythical creatures, the paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, even though those things are possible, no one's saying those are impossible, but because they don't have an empirical basis, it's far more likely that all such claims are psychological illusions, delusions, misconceptions, fallacies, biases, whatever. And because we do have a very strong basis for all of those things, we know those things exist. They happen at a huge, very high percent rate to human minds. So it's more reasonable to infer those things that have no empirical basis were made up by the mind of the individual than they actually occurred, regardless of how many other facts they got correct about the time period. And that seems to be the consensus in history and criminology. Like if someone says, I saw that guy carry a wand and cast Avada Kedavra and kill that guy, that's going to get thrown out of a courtroom. Like, no, that's like, there's no precedent for this. We can't convict someone off of a magical light beam. We don't know how to do that. You would need some further empirical evidence to justify that this is even possible before we could even consider that as a justifiable claim to believe just based off of your testimony. So testimony is not sufficient to justify any of those things that don't have an empirical basis: miracles, magic, mythical creature, paranormal, supernatural, etc.
Yeah. So how would you justify cold case, uh, um, convictions and stuff
DNA evidence.
if they don't have DNA? There's a lot
Uh,
that don't because the DNA is gone or whatever, but they still do it. So it's very interesting to see how we go about making a circumstantial case and stuff like that, and people get convicted on it all the time. But
sure, absolutely,
I,
but
yeah,
never for
so I mean,
miracles or
there's
magic. So all the cold cases are just, I saw that guy kill that guy, or
yeah,
that guy was in this location, or that guy had a crowbar. They're all things that already have an empirical basis. There's zero cold cases that say, I saw that guy cast a magical spell to kill that guy. Those are immediately thrown out. Every single
yeah.
type of cold case where you have a miracle, thrown out.
All right. So yeah, I mean, it would come back to my original starting point is that if I already believe that God exists, I think that those things are possible. And if everything else lines up, I would give it the benefit of the doubt of the probability. So at that point, yeah, that's where I would go. Now I understand what you're saying about coming to a place of skepticism when you first look at it. I think that's a good idea, even though I don't think we can escape our biases at times. We try to look at everything objectively as we can, but those biases do creep in at times. So
What
yeah.
bias is here? So I'm not excluding the possibility of miracles. I'm only
Oh
using the
yeah,
evidence we have.
absolutely,
So just
absolutely.
where I don't presuppose there, let's say I assume there is a God and miracles are possible. Should I believe that this person's account was a real miracle or something they made up? And if I look at the evidence of human history and say, oh, this is something that people make up all the time, there's nothing special here, it's more reasonable to conclude it was made up. Like, I don't know what your position on miracles is, but like many people claim, God helped me get my car keys. Like, should we believe that's a miracle, or should we believe that that's just they found their car keys and happened to pray and thought it was a miracle?
Yeah, I think there could be a case for both there. I mean, I don't think that miracles per se are. Of course I look at it through the lens of providence, and then miracles are something that don't really happen. Again, I don't have a write up for my argument on miracles right now. I don't want to, Tom. Like one of the biggest things for me is I hate to misspeak. You know, and I've already done it a couple times because I don't have my stuff. Like I said, if I'm going to debate a lot of this general stuff, I'd like to maybe I should have specified more with you, and that's my fault. But uh, um, yeah, I really hate to misspeak, so that's one of my biggest drawbacks. So, yeah, I would lend more. I would say it's more reasonable to say that these things happened, given that they've got everything else right on everything else they reported, and that these guys, truly believed it. They So yeah, I would. That's the route I would take at this present point. So even though I have all these supernatural, or even if I do, all these instances where people make up this stuff, I would have to look at each individual case to see where the fault was, where there would be a cause for skepticism to reject their claim. But I like to give people the benefit of the doubt and look into what they're saying, and then make my reasonable assessment after that.
Sure,
Does
sure.
that make sense?
Absolutely. So I would definitely think looking at every individual case is an important thing to do. But I think that when you hear, like, if someone said they had a magical pill that could make you lose weight, like 50 pounds after you take it, I think that it's reasonable to conclude, because that happens a sufficient amount of time, and we know that it's a lie every single time we've happened in the past, we can use induction to infer this is most likely also a lie. So I think that if we look at the past examples of evidence of psychology and how human minds construct these stories, and see this story seems to match one for one to all of those other psychological features, it seems more reasonable to infer it's wrong first and then look for some kind of better or greater evidence that could confirm it. And if it has that greater evidence, then we should take it seriously. But if it doesn't, and it just has the same level of evidence as all the other stories that are just made up by humans, we should probably conclude it's just the same made up by humans. Or wouldn't you agree? Like in the case of the car keys, do you think that if someone says they prayed to God and found their car keys, is it more reasonable to believe that's an actual miracle, or more reasonable to believe it's the psychological phenomenon of confirmation bias, where people prayed for something that happened and then they attributed it to the thing they prayed for?
Yeah, until I looked into it, I would probably start there, and so I guess with your example with the pill, I would want to look into that pill, even though I'm already skeptical about it. And if it turns out that that one pill is the right pill, I'm going to take it, man, because I need to lose some pounds. This quarantine is uh packed some pounds on me.
Yeah, me too. I gained like
I should get join a rock climbing gym. I just joined Planet Fitness because it was cheap.
yeah. For me, I gained 40 pounds on COVID. I had to lose.
Oh,
I've
did you?
lost
Oh, wow.
9 so far. I've got like another 30 to go. But yeah, so like if you heard there is this pill, and there's this, suppose there's a history textbook that says there is this magical pill, if you take it you're going to lose 50 pounds in like a week or whatever, and there's this account of these 12 gospels, 12 apostles who all took this pill and said it, and it worked, and they're like, and they died for it. They were crucified for the effectiveness of this pill. And there's this testimony of the gospels from all these different apostles. And the pill comes in a box. Like, you discover the pill in a box with this testimony. Would you take the pill just based off of the testimony of the New Testament, of the testimony of the apostles, the fact that they died for it, the historical reliability of all the other facts in the gospels? Would you take the pill just based off of the testimony in the New Testament?
Well, I mean, I take pretty much anything on test. A lot of my beliefs are based off testimony, Tom. I mean, I'm not doing the experiments myself, right? I mean, I don't have that luxury. So I'm basing a lot of my knowledge on other people's work. So if I'm going to give that the same amount of credibility, then I'm going to have to look into all those things. And if I find that they're more true than the other things, or the other stories or the other history books, I'm going to go with, and we do that with history. I mean, there's several different people that make claims about history. Which one am I going to believe, right? Which one am I going to, which one am I going to hold to? Which version of the history of the United States am I going to look at? The Native American or the colonist? I'm probably going to look at both of them and say, okay, I think this is more true than not. And that's what I do with when I look at the Gospels, and that's what I do. Look at the historical evidence, and I think that's what we all do. And in a degree, we just reach different conclusions.
Sure. But so like, my methodology would be is like, if I discovered this textual document that had a bunch of accurate historical facts and a pill that was going to make me lose 50 pounds, I would be like, nope, this is ridiculous. This is probably made up, especially because it's from 2,000 years ago. I would give the pill to scientists and say, scientists, test this and tell me if it works. And then if the modern scientist could empirically demonstrate it, had papers that can confirm this with novel testable predictions, I'd be like, yes, then I would believe it. but I wouldn't take the pill based off of the testimony and document. Like nothing the document could say would ever convince me that this pill was magic or could make me lose 50 pounds. I
So
would
you
give it to
would
the
base
scientists.
you would give it to these scientists that you trust to do the work, right?
Yes, I
You
would
would
give it
just
to
give it to
the.
them. So based off their testimony and their books and their papers that they give you, you would believe on them versus you know the 200 or 2,000 year old document. Okay, that's fine. You're more than welcome to do that. I understand that.
Well, do you think it's
But
more reasonable to trust the modern
I
scientists
think
than two
I
thousand
think
year old
it's
documents?
well, I don't think there is too many modern. There's no like modern scientists that are doing this type of stuff. I don't. If you already said the modern scientists are saying, yeah, they confirm all the stuff that happens in the Bible, just not the miracle claims, then I think we've got a different argument that we have to start looking into at that point. So yeah, we'd have to, like I said, we'd have to give it the full spectrum. I'm just not going to like to for your point to be valid and sound. I think that, yes, if you gave me a 2,000-year-old document that I just read and I didn't give credence to the entire study of it to see what the scientists said about that story, about that thing, then yeah, I would probably be skeptical. But upon sending that text off to people that study textual criticism or scientists that will carbon date it for me and other avenues of history that say, hey, everything that they're saying about this pill is checking out because these guys believed it. Not only did they believe it, but all the stuff is lining up. All the ducks are getting in a row. I'm probably going to say, yeah, that was probably true. Now again, I'm not going to know for certain until I take the pill, but yeah, I think that basically what we got from history is just like um your testimony from the scientist you gave the pill to. So um yeah, I mean, I wish I had if we're having a debate on this, of course I would prepare differently, obviously, but this is just a discussion, so that's kind of where I would stand.
Yeah. So
But
so you said that you see the testimony of the document as equivalent to the testimony of modern scientists.
no, no, what I said is that you see, here I go, I probably misspoke again, but um what I said is once it goes through all the rigorous tests that you would put in it if you're doing an investigation and it came back as solid, then I would say, okay, I've got a good reason to take this pill.
Oh, I
So
would
that's
agree
kind of
with
like
you.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I would say
And I
that.
think I think that's where we are at with the gospels. Now you would disagree with that conclusion, obviously. But that's where I'm at on it. So
Well,
that's where I would
suppose
be
you
able.
you have the document in the pill, and you send the document out to the scientist, and the scientists test the document and say, yes, all of its historical facts are correct, but you didn't give them the pill, so they can't do anything with the pill to test to see if it works. But all of the other historical facts are correct. It just gets the history right. Would you take the pill, or would you be justified in taking the pill, or should you send the pill out to be tested? Like, should you, if the testimony in the document from the historical facts are reliable, should you infer from that that this pill is reliable, or should you still infer that people have made this claim for thousands of years, they've all been wrong, it's all been bunk, we should probably infer the pill is probably bunk also, and then send the pill itself out to be tested? So that's the difference between my interpretation of the gospels is that the pill being the resurrection and the miracles, scientists have never tested that. That's like you having a pill and you've never given it out to the scientists to be tested. So we can say nothing about the miracles, but all the other facts are right. So we can confirm the historical facts. Like, yeah, you got Jesus lived, Jesus was crucified, et cetera, et cetera. But the pill we can't test. Now, from my perspective, I would say I'm not going to take the pill. Like, until I give the pill to the scientist and the scientist can show the pill is working, I'm not going to take the pill. Do you think that it would be reasonable, just based off of the historical testimony of the past, that this pill works without actually giving it to the scientist, that we should believe the pill works?
I would agree with you that you should send off the pill, just like I would infer that all the evidence that I've gathered, plus the Gospels itself, because it's part of a cumulative case, add up to God, and the truth of the miracle claims, like an argument for miracles and stuff like that, that's where I would make my determination. Once I gave a thorough view of all the evidence, yeah, I don't think the historical argument alone is good enough, but I do think that the historical argument, along with all the other arguments that I've studied over my lifetime, add up to saying, yeah, this is trustworthy, this is reliable, and so forth. So I'm your typical theist here and apologist, Tom. So I'm not going to give you anything new that you're going to be able to like that that you haven't dealt with before. So I mean that's kind of where I'm at right now. And as the journey continues, I hope to find out more things. And I love your analogies, dude. Especially the one with the napkin that you gave to Trent Doherty. The eternal napkin. I mean, I love those type of things that make you think. Unlike you, though, I'm not a thinker on the spot, man. You have a gift, my friend. You can think right on the spot, man. I have to take time to like really develop it, and that could be my paranoia for misspeaking. So.
Yeah, it just takes
But,
practice, I guess.
yeah, and like I said, that I've been a moderator for so long, and that's really all I do in the public sphere, unless I'm like working with you personally, that we have these talks over and over again. That's where I guess that would come in, me speaking more fluently and thinking about the issues and studying the issues and thinking nice and long about them. But not everybody is as gifted as you in that wittiness, my friend.
Well, cool. We've been going for about an hour, so I think it'd be good
Yeah.
time to wrap up because I'm gonna
Yeah.
go bike and try to lose some of that COVID weight.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I'll go to the gym here after I clean out my wife's van. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
awesome. It was
she's
great
making
having you on. I enjoyed
yeah,
talking with you.
man.
You're very pleasant. You're no Darth Dawkins. I'll give you that, sir.
Well, I'm not a presuppositionalist either, so I'm not going to hit you with any of that craziness. But Tom, you're awesome at like basically making people be skeptical, and I think that's a value in our society. I think it's a value to, and even the presuppositionalists who I detest most of the time. I would say that they have also a gift to deconstruct things and make you think about your position and so forth. And I appreciate that from you, and I enjoy talking with you too, man. And I hope to have you on my show sometime, man.
Absolutely. So yeah, you want to tell everybody again where they can find you, your links and stuff?
Yep, you can find us at Proselytize or Apostatize at YouTube. We're also on Facebook. That's the main site if you want to look for like any debates or interviews. We do interviews. Actually, sometimes we respond to skeptics, on that show. We haven't done one on Tom yet, but I'm sure we will at some point. But he can handle it. But yeah,
Aw-
that's it. That's it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks again, David, for coming on. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation, and I will let you go. Have a nice day.
You too, buddy. Take care.